This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to From Guilt to Good, Self-Care Solutions for Busy Caregivers, the podcast rewriting the narrative of self-care. If you're a caregiver feeling stretched thin, torn between responsibilities, and longing for self-care, then you're in the right place. I'm Jeanette Yates, fellow caregiver and someone who spent years doing all the self-care things and never really feeling any better. After years of research, self-exploration, and trial and error, I finally found a way to create a sustainable self-care practice that made me feel good, not guilty. And in From Guilt to Good, we'll explore how you can do that too. Together, we'll hear expert insights, actionable steps, and heartfelt stories to guide you toward rediscovering your worth, reclaiming your health, and getting back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. Speaking of joy, today I am interviewing Tamara Zoner. She is a certified happiness trainer. How cool is that? We are officially getting some training on happiness. I love it. So just a little bit more about Tamara. She's an award-winning keynote speaker, a happiness trainer, and she supports people struggling in transition to develop deeper relationships with themselves and others, cultivate authentic happiness, and create a life that they love. And not that they're going to love later, but that they love right now. And she does this by teaching small, simple changes. With a blend of spirituality, self-love, and practicality, Tamara makes it feel possible for people to live more authentically, being true to themselves without trying to fake it, and shifting their relationships with themselves and others in a loving and respectful way. You know, one of the things that I really loved about my interview with Tamara is, of course, I invited her on here because, you know, who doesn't want to talk to a happiness trainer? But it turns out she also has a tremendous amount of experience in the professional caregiving space. And so I did dive into a little bit of her experience working in a facility, because I know that sometimes we just want to know what's going on. And so she tells us a little bit more, a little behind the scenes of what goes on. And of course, she's only speaking for her experience, of course, but it's nice to get a little bit of insight into the professional side of caregiving, I think. And of course, she has some insights for family caregivers who interact with those professional caregivers as well. So I really appreciated that portion of the call, or the interview, excuse me. I feel like it's a call, but it's an interview, but it's a conversation. It's all of those things. But anyway, I hope that you really enjoy it. It was a great conversation for me to have. She really gave a lot of value, gave a lot of ways that, practical things that we can do, just little teeny things. And I know that you're going to love it. So check out my interview with Tamara. If you're an overwhelmed caregiver that longs for some of your life back, craves time for self-care, freedom from the isolation of caregiving and the guilt, then the Empowered Self-Caregiver cohort is for you. Within the Empowered Self-Caregiver cohort, we'll take a deeper look into your unique caregiving challenges, assess your current self-care practices, and explore a personalized plan where you feel your self-care focus is most necessary. You'll design a self-care practice that is flexible enough for your life and something that you're going to actually enjoy. Erase your guilt, embrace a sense of worthiness and empowerment, and create an unshakable support system to avoid a lonely caregiving journey. In the Empowered Self-Caregiver cohort, I share the very steps I took to break the burnout cycle of self-care. As someone who has been a caregiver for over 2 decades, I know what it's like and I know what it takes to finally find balance. And my care framework inside the cohort teaches you to find that balance too. If you're interested in learning more about the Self-Caregiver cohort, please go to theselfcaregiver.com or check the show description for details. Hey, Tamara, welcome to the From Guilt to Good podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Jeanette. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. And I want you to tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then tell us your connection with caregiving. If caregiving has affected you in any way, or if you've been a caregiver in any way, we'd love to know that as well.
Okay. I'm Tamara Zoner. I'm a coach, a speaker, a trainer, and I teach and train on the topics of really the whole encompassing topic of well-being, but specifically strategies and actions and habits of happiness. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I came to it through my own misery, searching back toward a memory of being happy once and knowing that that was possible for me, and then finding my path back to me. And along the way, I was working in senior living. And so I have 7 years of experience in senior living, from the full suite of care into more independent living, where I was the director of life enrichment, and we saw everything. And you cannot, no matter what your position in a senior community, you're caregiving. Right. And I did also witness my dad, caregiving my grandmother, who lived until she was 101 in her own home. Wow. So she had round the clock care in home. And so I've seen it from both sides. Frankly, I'd be happy to move into a senior community, but
well, I was thinking it, and I just talked to you before I hit record, like, this is the way it's going to go. And now, of course, I already have a bonus question, which is why I like to keep these interviews flexible. But, we very rarely get to talk to someone as a caregiver on the other side who's trying to serve the people in the senior living, professionally in a senior living facility. And a lot of times, I'm just going to say it. A lot of times the people that work there get a bad rap, and there's not a lot of positivity around dealing with, the conversations, the system, all of that kind of stuff. And so I want to ask you, from your perspective as someone who worked in a senior living space, what would you want caregivers to know about, from your personal experience? I know you don't speak for every facility person, but from your experience, what would you say about the people you worked with, about you when you were working there? What would you want us to know?
From my personal perspective, I want you to know that we appreciate how much you do. From one company to the other was a very different experience for me. One, which was the full suite of care. So there was caregiving on staff, to the independent living. We're not independent. Right. There was, so many caregivers, whether it was their children or whether it was hired caregiving help. Like, you do so much, and we appreciate it. And it's a very different story whether you are hired to be someone's caregiver or whether you are the family member giving the care. Both are a lot of time and energy. But what I saw in the difference was sometimes those care providers who were simply hired to take care of someone's loved one, they were just filling some time. That's not everybody, because some of them are amazing. Right. And I would invite them, this activity would be really good for what she's struggling with, or this, and they'd be like, well, yeah, we'll see. So what I want to say is take them to everything you can, because it makes it easier on you to have them occupied, even if you're doing more, and it helps them last longer.
Right.
The more active that anybody is, the more the brain is active, the more the body is active, the better quality of life they're going to have, and the easier, it's not easy, but the easier your job will be. Keep them active and keep them social.
Right. And I just want to tell all my caregivers, the caregiver listeners out there, hey, this is great. But also, if your loved one doesn't want to do it, you don't need to feel guilty that they don't want to do it. And you don't need to beat yourself up about it. You offer it as an option. You maybe offer it more than once, but you don't drive yourself crazy trying to get them to do things that they either can't, don't want to, aren't in the mood, all that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about people's interacting with people's attitudes here in a minute, but I just also want to remind,
just loving encouragement, lots of loving encouragement. Even if you're just in the room where activities are going on, that's more than being alone in the, apartment or room.
Yeah. Well, I just know from personal experience and then also working with caregivers a lot, that's like, I'm so frustrated because they won't do this. I hear that a lot. Like, they're in a facility that has so many fun things and they just want to stay in their room. And it's like, well, that's not good for them. You know that. They probably know it too.
They do.
But listen, you can only make the suggestion so many times. Make the suggestion and then let it go. Like, don't hold on to it. Which is a key to my happiness, I can tell you. But let's go ahead and move into some of the work you do around, your mental perspective, your emotions, how you interact with people. And since we kind of already kind of touched base on like interacting, maybe it's with the staff member at the facility that is maybe not in a good mood, or your loved one is not in a good mood, or just, life in general. We encounter people all the time. Can you talk a little bit about, when we encounter people on a regular basis that have a negative vibe or negative, even more than vibe, maybe they're just saying negative things. Mm-hmm. How do we try to maintain some level of positivity, or at least not allow it to stir up our frustration and anxiety and things like that?
This is a lot of self-care hygiene that, occurs outside of the situation. And then once you're in the situation around that more negative person, hopefully you're practicing some breathing, some mindfulness, some stillness when you can. And I like to say that self-care can come in bite-sized chunks. You don't need to have an hour or a day at the spa. Right. You can take 1 minute to breathe and reset yourself. So when you're in that negative situation, one of my favorite ways, if it's possible, and it depends right on the cognition of the person that you're dealing with. Maybe they're on staff and they're fully there, and maybe they're your loved one and they are not. So it depends, of course. But one of my favorite ways is to set boundaries. And this can be really, really hard for people. But creating and cultivating and keeping healthy boundaries is exceptionally important for your own sanity. And that can look like, I'll often encourage, because I still go and speak in a lot of senior communities, and when I'm giving talks to them, I'll encourage them to use, instead of asking someone, hey, how are you? Which is like Pandora's box could open. Right. You say, what's good with you today? And you frame the conversation so that they are forced in a way to consider that. Because it's not something most people, especially when we're going through trying times and we're declining or we're dealing with people who are, think about, right? They're just like, oh my God, this aches and that hurt and that went wrong. So when we ask, hey, what's good with you today? What's going right for you today? What's a win for you? It causes our brain to look for that. And it immediately shifts the biochemistry in our bodies from all the negative hormones to maybe a little oxytocin, maybe a little endorphins that are positive.
I love that you said that, and I do want to tell those of you who are watching or listening, if you are like, I cannot set a boundary, I don't know, like that's really freaks me out, just go to the show notes. I've got you. I have some resources for you. I have a workshop. I have a workbook, all these things you can download that. So if you're like, I need to learn the basics of boundary setting, especially with a parent. If you're caregiving for a parent, the boundary, like setting a boundary is just different with your parent than it is with your child or, with people outside the world. And so I've got some resources for you. So thanks for mentioning that. But also I can attest to what you're saying being true. And the second thing that you said that I really love too is it's not so much practicing in the room that you're in the specific thing. It is developing habits and mindsets and practices outside on a regular basis.
Yes.
And then when you are in the room with the situation, it allows for those more positive responses to come out. One of the things that I talk about, we do a lot of mindfulness work in the self-caregiver community. Nice. And one of the things I say is, yes, when we're intentionally coming together to practice mindfulness, we're in a quiet space, we've got a candle, whatever it is, but the mindfulness doesn't just stay there.
Right.
The more you practice mindfulness intentionally, like at a specific time of day, the more that translates into your life. The same with breathing. I remember I used to be a fitness instructor. And one of the things I learned when I was learning Pilates was there are two things that your body does, both voluntarily and involuntarily. Eye blinking is one and breathing is the other. So the idea, of course, is if you voluntarily breathe in a certain way, slower, deeper, longer, quieter, then when you're just breathing, because that's what you need to do in life, your body's just doing it for you, it picks up those characteristics. And I haven't, I'm not a scientist, so I haven't done like a research study on this, but that's the way I feel about mindfulness too. Like if you're intentionally practicing mindfulness, awareness, at given times on your mat or, in your quiet space, then that it kind of becomes the way you are in the world. And so I think that's very helpful.
It is very helpful. And that is so true because it helps us to just settle in to ourselves. And it's, it helps us cultivate that pause button, as I call it. So we're not reacting, we're responding from a place of calm more often than not. And the more that we practice that mindfulness or that stillness, even if it's for 3 or 5 minutes a day, the more we're able to translate that into real world life experiences. And I was just telling one of my clients yesterday, who is a mom of young kids whose mother-in-law just passed, and she was caregiver to mother-in-law and mom to her, 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. And I said, so now she gets to level up because she's been practicing in the quiet spaces. And I said, now this week, why don't you practice in the middle of your kid's temper tantrum? Right. Stick a sticky note where you can remember to breathe, right? Wherever he might lose it, wherever anybody around you might lose it, on the door of your mom or your client, if you're a paid caregiver. And just remember that you have your breath always. It's always there. You just have to remember to let it lengthen, let it slow, let it deepen. And that is so vital for the brain, because if we're in emergency response because we're stressed because they're starting to get super negative or angry or stubborn, as it may be, and we can breathe and come back, then we're able to respond instead of get wrapped up in their tornado of stress. Right. Because that doesn't help them and it doesn't help us. So the more we can practice at a stoplight on the way to work or to see our moms, right? When a clock isn't functioning the way it's supposed to. Can we stop and breathe and even let the breath deepen while we're doing that thing? Yeah.
I love that you talked about that pause in between, because a lot of the research, talks about the reason mindfulness is so helpful, or meditation, those kind of things, is because when you don't have the pause, you're having a stress reaction versus a stress response that is more mindful. And so, a lot of times caregivers, I know this was my case when I was experiencing burnout, the hits were coming so quickly that I did not have time to come down off the fight or flight. So my body was always being chased by a lion. Like it thought we were constantly fighting for our lives. And though sometimes like, I might've been fighting for her life or, things were stressful, I really didn't have to be in that level of fight or flight. I could actually needed to be in the restful state so that I could make decisions.
Exactly. Finding that pause button. So important. And when people have a misconception about what self-care looks like. And I'm like on a mission now to get it down to bite-sized chunks so that you can, you do have time for it. You can weave it throughout your day. And I have started telling people, I don't care if it's for the 1 minute you are peeing on the toilet, breathe deeper in that 1 minute.
Okay. Now I think you're in my head. Well, because one of the things I teach, and it sounds like you teach the same thing, is don't keep telling yourself you don't have time for self-care. Like that's that negative, right? That we don't have time, we don't have time, we don't have time. But what if we looked for the time that we're already using to take care of ourselves? And some people are like, I'm not doing anything to take care of myself. I bet you're going to the bathroom.
Right.
I bet you're brushing your teeth.
Yep.
I bet you're drinking water, Diet Coke, or a coffee, something.
Mm-hmm. Probably taking a shower at least every few days.
Probably taking a shower. Whatever it is. For me, it was teeth brushing that I first started doing this with. And basically, I would say to myself, I used to like brush my teeth while I was checking email or while I was, whatever. And I stopped doing that. And I started doing, okay, this is my 2.5 minutes of my quip. It's going to buzz. I'm going to put it in my mouth, like this is my 2.5 minutes.
Yes.
I am going to take every second of this 2.5 minutes and I'm going to own it. It is my 2.5 minutes. I'm going to enjoy this little bit of self-care that I have today. Mm-hmm. And of course, what happened is then I was like, oh yeah, I probably should floss, which I've never had done in my whole life, but now I'm a flosser because it's part of my self-care. Yeah. It's that time I have, right. And it's like, oh, now I have even more time. Yeah. And so that is how I took that 2.5 minutes and turned it into 5 minutes. The same with, eating or taking a shower. Not that you want to stand in the shower for 30 minutes, but even if you're in the shower for 5 minutes, but it's your 5 minutes.
Right.
Then you're telling yourself, look at all this stuff I'm doing today that I'm taking care of myself.
I'm taking care of myself. I love that.
And so I'm a big fan of bite-sized chunks. I not only think that they work in bite-sized chunks, but I also think that they can expand within that time. So if you see what you already are doing, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, those times will expand, especially if you start to realize that, you are taking care of yourself. And another thing I love about breathing is, like you said, it's always with us. Mm-hmm. If you're breathing, you're taking care of yourself.
Yes.
I mean, so sometimes you can say, I'm breathing. Like I just took care of myself.
Sometimes when I ask that question, what's good with you? When people are like, I don't know, I'm like, are you breathing? Like that's enough to celebrate right there. And it really is. You mentioned, those thoughts you're thinking, I'm so busy. One of the practices that I encourage people, and I do for myself, is to switch that off. When I say, oh my God, I'm so busy, it immediately puts this pressure. I feel like I don't have time. And so if I switch my language to I have many things to do and I have plenty of time to do it. Mm-hmm. Right? It switches. Now I feel more expanded. Now I feel more open. Oh yeah, there's things to do and I have space between them. I have time between them. I have time to do them. I have time for them, because what we tell ourselves really in the form of thoughts creates our experience. So it's not always what's going on that's so stressful or painful. It's what we're thinking about it and how we're thinking about it. And actually, Jeanette, the main difference between happy people, like the happiest people in the world, and unhappy people is simply that we have different behaviors, different habits of thoughts and action. So we think differently and we behave differently because we're behaving based on our thinking. So if we can just start to catch ourselves in negative thinking and go, wait, what's true? What's actually true? Okay, am I busy or do I have a lot to do? There are two different things. There are two different feelings. So we can start to just switch our language to be more supportive of our experience.
And yeah, I love that you said that. And because that brings me to like the idea of busyness, of course, is a badge that we wear, you know, like I'm very busy in some way means I'm very important, you know, like I have a lot to do. But I think also if we are starting to switch that to I have a lot to do, if we're starting to switch the feeling of control that we have in our day. So instead of, I don't have any time to care for myself, I am caring for myself. This is what I'm doing. Then I think the next step or another step to take is I have a lot of things to do, but do I? Like, are all of these things that I'm doing really necessary?
Yes.
And some things we do that aren't necessary, like I'm going to share my clock. I'm trying to figure out this clock for my mom. I don't have to do it. She already has a clock. I want to know, you know, but you know, it's not that everything has to be necessary, but I think a lot of times we have put items on our plate in our mind. We're trying to figure things out constantly in our brain that we do not need to be doing, nor is it helpful or serving really anybody, but we feel like it's our responsibility in some way. But that brings me to, and you've kind of already hit on it, but this critical voice. So there's the critical voice that says, I'm not taking care of myself. I should take better care of myself. I'm not doing a good enough job caregiving or parenting or, you know, working. There's the critical voice that says, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. How, you know, is it a matter of, is your recommendation to reframe that? How do we deal with that negative, that critical playlist constantly going on?
First, we want to know that it has a job too. And so we can be compassionate toward it. So the subconscious mind, that inner critic that starts popping out and telling you you're not enough, right? The opposite of your shirt, which I love. It's doing its job. Its job is to keep us safe. And to the subconscious mind, safe means the status quo, everything we already know. Doesn't matter how consciously uncomfortable we are. It's just like, nope, this is what we know. This is what we stay in. So if we know negativity, which most people do because we have a negativity bias for a survival purpose, then it's going to be like, nope, we are safe here in our misery. Don't change. So one of the first things that we can do is be compassionate with it. I know that's your job. I feel you're trying to protect me, and I'm okay to make this change right now. And so we want to, I always say, spend a week just noticing the quality of your thoughts, just noticing when you're harsh, noticing when you're beating yourself up, notice when you're being critical of others. And then in week 2, could you catch yourself and interrupt that and go, hold on, hold up. And usually when I work with clients longer term, we'll do a whole practice around getting aware of like our most pervasive negative critical thought, and then implementing a stop word. So something to interrupt the pattern. So it can be as easy as stop, cancel, delete. You know, I used to have the Billy Crystal's wife in The Princess Bride going, liar, liar, liar. And then once we've interrupted that pattern, then we can kind of turn it around to what's actually true. Oh, I'm not so stupid that I, dropped the butter and broke the dish. I'm exhausted and I'm human. Right. A very different way of being. And the other thing I wanted to mention as far as language goes, when we come back to that to-do list, because we can get so critical. Oh my God, look at me. I can't get anything done. Geez, I'm so lazy, or there's not enough time. Instead of saying all the things you have to do, choose to do them. I choose to mess about with this clock to help my mom. I choose to say yes to this additional step. I choose to fold the towels. I choose to take a shower. It's not what I have to do. It's what I'm choosing to do. And then if you write down everything that you have to do and you switch it to I choose to do, Guess how much easier it's going to be to cross 5 things off that list.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is so important, I think, for caregivers to work on, because many, I've read many messages, many things, and everyone is like, how did I get in here? I did not choose this. I'm stuck here, all these kind of things. And I felt the same way. My mom was diagnosed with her disease when I was 8. So I started helping her then. Okay. And then now I'm 49. Okay. And somewhere along the way, I became the caregiver. You know what I mean? And so I told myself for a long time that, well, first I told myself, this is my duty as a good daughter and, this kind of stuff. And then I told myself, I feel stuck. I didn't choose this. This is hard. There were no boundaries, all these kind of things. And then one day I was like, well, you may not have had to sit down and made a decision, but you can start choosing to do the caregiving now. So, and then I allowed myself to choose it. But then what happened, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is when you change the I have to I choose to, it might also change how you are doing that thing. So like my caregiving changed when I decided I'm going to choose to be my mom's caregiver, but I'm going to choose how I do it as well. And that meant I had to start setting boundaries. That meant I had to start, asking, not only advocating for my mom in a different way, but advocating for myself in a different way, all of those things. So it's kind of snowballed into a bunch of different changes for me. But I think that's another thing. And I'd love to hear your take on that or your thoughts on that idea of when you choose something, you then have the power or the ability to control how you're doing it.
Yes. And I love how you are aware of that, how your mindset sort of shifted in that experience. Because here's the thing, one of the tenets of happiness is that it's our responsibility. My life is my responsibility. My happiness is my responsibility. And some people will say, yeah, but no, I didn't choose that, or this horrible thing happened or whatever. Okay, no, we can't control circumstances. We cannot. Circumstances happen, things happen, and we can, to some extent, with practice, choose how we respond or react to them. And so, this can I try to keep it at a very, every human can tap into this, whether they're spiritual or religious or not. And in some aspect, there's a bigger thing in the world, right? Happy people are also connected to something greater than themselves, regardless of what they call it. So if we can tap into knowing that we're all connected on some level, even if it's just energetically, like when we break it straight down to the atoms and particles, right? Yeah. Then we're all one thing. And I take responsibility for my own happiness. Then that means I choose everything in my experience, even if I'm unaware of it on some level. This is for me. So I have a mantra that I adopted years ago as I started this journey of getting back to myself as a happy person, as a healthy person, that everything happens for me. And what I love about life is that we create our own meanings. None of us actually know for sure, as much faith as we might have, what happens after. None of us know for sure, even if we think we do. So we can choose to make the meaning that supports us now. And so I say everything happens for me. So I can look back at an abusive marriage and go, it was for me. And this is my evidence as to how it's for me. Look at the strong woman that I am today. Look at the amazing children I have. Look at the experiences I've had in my life. It's all for me if I take responsibility for it. But if I put my power in everyone else's hands, it's their fault, they're to blame, that's the reason I'm miserable, they're the reason I'm miserable, then we hand over our power to be happy, to be healthy, to experience well-being. We're giving it all away. It's in someone else's hands. So we want to take responsibility for it so that we have power over our experience. We can choose. It doesn't matter who's the president or who's the boss of the facility your parent lives in.
Right.
It doesn't matter the staff that you have to work with, because you have a choice to make about your own experience. And it opens up this very empowered sense. And it takes time to make these thinking changes. This won't happen overnight. So if you're like, that's a good idea, Tamara, but how am I supposed to do that? One freaking breath at a time, my friend.
Right.
One breath at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time. Baby steps lead to sustainable change, not overwhelming. I give up. It's too much. No change.
Right. Yeah. As you were talking about this, I couldn't help but think about another thing that I struggled with and was able to overcome, but I hear this from caregivers a lot and we talk about it a lot. But it's my responsibility. My happiness is my responsibility. But sometimes caregivers feel like their loved one's happiness is also their responsibility. And that can lead to some we're never going to get it right sometimes. And so I'd love for you to talk to caregivers about that idea of like, how do we deal with that thing in our head? Maybe it's another critic that's telling us, it's your job to make sure that these final days, years, weeks, or months, whatever, are as happy, to make your loved one happy during this time when it's not,
Yeah.
I think that's something that we all struggle with.
Big and heavy. And we do all struggle whether we're caregiving for an older adult or our own kids. And first, I just want to say, that's a really heavy responsibility to place on yourself, because we can't make anyone do, be, or think anything. We can't make them. We don't have that power. And so one of the things that really helped me, I have I wouldn't call her special needs, but I would call her a high needs child. She's definitely on the spectrum. She's exceptionally intelligent, and she deals with a lot of anxiety and depression. And one of the things that I had to practice embracing and breathe into is that she has her journey and I have mine. And while they cross paths, they're two separate journeys. I can't make her happy. I teach happiness. I can't make her be happy. That's her journey, her choice. If my parent or loved one has fully committed to this will be a miserable end of life, I will only be miserable trying to change that. Instead, could I just be there with them? It's just like when we are feeling miserable, if we try to argue ourselves out of how we're feeling, we're invalidating our experience and it causes more pain. If we sit there and go, shoot, I'm really, I don't know what your rating is. Shoot, I'm really miserable. This really hurts. I'm exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. And we immediately try to argue ourselves out of it. We invalidate ourselves and it gets worse. I like to say, if you ignore it, you store it. If you feel it, you heal it. So,
put it on a shirt, girl.
I know, right? I need to. If you can take even the 1 minute or the 2 or the 5 to sit with how you're feeling before you try to change your mind about it, which I do fully appreciate and love and encourage reframing, but not before you honor yourself where you're at.
Right.
And when we are able to just notice how we're feeling, breathe into it, honor it, give it a voice, we can do the same for our loved ones. Instead of going, no, let's do this so you're happy, just go, man, I see that this is hard for you. This is hurting.
Right.
Like, what would be helpful for you today? Instead of trying to make them happy, we're simply asking them, how can I be with you in this discomfort? Because it's hard. That's the truth. It's hard. It's scary. It hurts. So,
I started doing that with my mom and it has made a difference because I'm both not trying to fix anything.
Right.
And also validating her experience.
Yes.
because she is, and we just have been through the transition of her having to not live at home anymore and live in a nursing home. And it was the thing
it's so hard.
that she did not want to do.
Yeah.
So it was like, since I was 8 years old, this was never going to happen. Right. And then, and probably had I still been trying to make her happy instead of keep her safe and make sure she had the best care, she might still be at home, but probably, or, not here. So,
I love that distinction you just made. If I had been trying to make her happy instead of keeping her safe, we might have a different story right now. So ultimately, what's more important?
And I had to have that hard conversation with her, where it was like, this is going to happen, but that's a different episode. But what I wanted to say is, like, now she's in this place. Is it perfect? No. Is it her own home? No. And so a lot of times what I say is, yes, you are right. This is not what we imagined for you. And I know that it is hard, but of the options we had, this is the one that kept you safe. But, and then to your point, what would it be helpful to you now? And for the first 6 months, it was get me out of here. But now we're starting to like make, have different things that she says. But, it's just, I'm so grateful that we have had this time today, because I really think it's so important for caregivers to recognize. And one of the things that you've done today throughout our whole conversation is both talk to us about changing what we're thinking, like don't, dwell in the pit kind of thing.
Yeah, you can throw a pity party, just don't move in.
But also, those feelings are real. We don't need to be afraid of them. If we're angry, sad, frustrated, have anxiety, that's our body trying to tell us something. We can acknowledge that. I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and we were talking through an emotion that she keeps having, and she's like, I don't understand why I keep feeling this way. And I said, well, so you can stop trying to not feel that way and say, you can get curious about it. You can get curious and say, this feeling keeps coming up. I don't understand why I'm feeling this way. So I'm going to get curious about it and kind of examine the circumstances around it. Maybe you will understand why you're feeling that way. Or you can note that that's the way you feel when a certain thing happens, make note of it, and then just let it go. Like, maybe you don't need to dig any deeper. Maybe you're like, yeah, when I drop the hammer on my toe hurts. I don't need to go any deeper about why my toe hurts. I just know that happened. So it depends on what's going on, or how deep you want to go with it. But I love that you're saying, yes, your feelings are valid. Yes, it's okay to think about it, but then we can reframe and move forward instead of getting stuck in that hamster wheel.
Yes, exactly. That's so vital. So notice, honor, give it a voice, then choose to use whatever tools that will help you make a shift, right, from it to a different state, a more expanded state. Because we contract, we expand, just like nature, just like the seasons. Right. We contract, we expand. So we're contracting, we're in this negative state. If we just try to ignore it, we stay there. If we just go, ooh, feeling this, right? Hammer fell on my toe. This really freaking hurts. Maybe there's no reason except for that the universe said, hey, slow down a minute. Yeah. You won't listen to me, so I'm forcing you to pause. Right? But if we can look at all of our emotions just as messages, just as feedback, we can honor them and move through them so much more easily than if we ignore them and store them, and then they come back bigger and louder. And the same for our loved one. They're going through some stuff, and all any human wants is to be seen and heard. We just want someone to go, I see you. I see that you're in pain. I am here for you. But we don't want people to take away our pain, because it's ours. If they want to be there for us and comfort us, fine, but that's ours. And I am strong enough and smart enough to deal with it. And so is your loved one, no matter how old, no matter how declining they are, no matter where their mind is, they still want some independence. That's why it's so hard to move from home into a community. Mm-hmm. That's so hard because they're giving up independence. Yeah. And then the next one might be, or maybe it already happened, is, oh, I can't drive anymore. Oh, now my daughter is mothering me. It is really challenging.
Yeah. Well, and I think that not like we're another thing in the caregiving space, and then we can wrap up, but like another thing in the caregiving space, it's like, like it's so hard, like I must be doing something wrong because it's so hard, it's so hard. Why isn't it easier? This is supposed to be, this is the way it's, and it's like, well, first of all, you feel like it's hard because it is hard. Yes. And if you keep trying to act like it's not supposed to be hard, then we're denying reality. Like Correct. What we are having to do as caregivers or getting to do or choosing to do, it is a hard thing. And we have to understand that, one, we're choosing to do it, and two, we can do hard things. Right. So, but I think when we're trying to like not make it hard, we're missing the point. Like that's not where it's at. It's understanding that it's hard and knowing that we can do it anyway. And also there's changes that we can make.
Yes. That all of those things, it can feel really hard and challenging. You can do hard things, and there are ways to make it easier on yourself. And one of those is basic self-care.
Okay. So on that note, we'll wrap up today because we could keep talking. I say this to all my guests. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, I really should just have a streaming and just leave it on all the time.
Right. Constantly in and out. There's so much to say on this topic. So
yeah, well, that's actually, would that be kind of cool if like there was just a studio and people that work with caregivers or caregivers could just come in and have a voice for a few minutes?
Yes.
And then it's just brought, like, someone's hearing it in the world. Oh, that's my new idea. I know. I just heard you. You're like, that sounds awesome. All right, Tamara, thank you so much for joining me today. Are there any last things you want to share, or anything that you want to share before we sign off today?
I just want to tell everybody that you deserve your own love and care, and you have time for it, because 1 minute is enough. 1 minute, 3 times a day, you can do that. So know that you're worth it, know that you deserve it, and know that you need it to get through this and come out on the other side a stronger person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I also agree with bite-sized chunks, which, speaking of which, if you need 5 minutes of breathing, check the show notes, because I've got a 5-minute hit pause meditation series that you can do also. And I will also have all of Tamara's links so that you can check out what she's doing in the world. Tamara, thank you so much for joining us today. Come back and see us soon.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. From Guilt to Good Podcast is a proud member of the Whole Care Podcast Network. To access additional self-care resources that help you feel good, not guilty, check out the show notes or head to theselfcaregiver.com. Subscribe now and join me in going from guilt to good as you rediscover your worth, reclaim your health, and get back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this show, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback matters. We're redefining self-care for caregivers, one episode at a time. And until next time, remember, you are worthy of the same care you give others. Thanks.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.